Well, thank you so much for having us. We are RetroBlasting. We're a YouTube channel. We've been around since 2012. My name is Michael.
I'm Melinda.
And we are here to give you Star Wars animated history. Before we get started, I just want to make one statement, and that is we will be mentioning Rebels, but out of respect for the Rebels panels that are going on this weekend, we're not going to be going too heavy into Rebels. Also, given the fact that some of you may not be as far along in the watching of it as others, so that just helps us avoid spoiling Rebels for anybody who may not have seen the rest of it. But as for everything else, we're going to get right into it, so we're going to assume you've seen it. So.
All right, so just to make it a little bit easier for some of you guys to sort of put this in the timeline of Star Wars as opposed to the chronology of our universe, Star Wars is sort of notorious for taking everything out of order. So we're just going to reference back to this timeline periodically and kind of show you. So the first thing we're going to talk about today, of course, is the holiday special, because that's the first animated Star Wars anything. So of course that comes up in between.
Right, it comes up in between New Hope and New Hope
4 and 5
and Empire Strikes Back.
Yep. So it was done by Nelvana, which is a company, I don't know if any of you have seen Rock and Rule, but if you haven't, it's a very interesting movie that was, they had actually been approached to do heavy metal, but they turned it down so that they could do this movie, and it wasn't really promoted in the States, but it's, just as a side note, check it out, it's really cool. And they were also going to do a Doctor Who animated special, but they never made that, but they do have a very distinctive animation style, and that's kind of why I wanted to show you this scene. Of course, what everyone remembers about the holiday special, aside from the fact that it's really, really weird, and it's not really able to be purchased in any legitimate way, is that it introduced Boba Fett. And so this is the first time where we see in animation that they do a lot of like creating new characters that then become canon and become like a thing within the Star Wars universe. The voices were done by the original cast, so it's really cool, even in the very short animation, to see, you know, our beloved characters from the first original trilogy in animation with their real voices. So it's very cool to watch. So here's just a little small clip to sort of give you a taste if you haven't seen it.
What's the matter with R2? I'm afraid, sir, it's because you said Boba is a friend and faithful ally that it simply does not feed properly into R2's information bank. What are you talking about? We intercepted a message between Boba and Darth Vader, sir. Boba Fett is Darth Vader's right-hand man. I'm afraid this photo adventure has been a heavy plot. We'll meet again, friend.
I don't really know why Boba Fett went to such great lengths to ingratiate himself and find them, only to just say, see you later, and leave. But, I mean, you know, what are you going to do?
Yeah, this first short, which is universally considered the best part of the entire holiday special, set the precedent from the very first animated series for Star Wars for creating a character in another medium and then putting that character into the movies. And so we didn't have to wait for that to happen. It happened with the holiday special. You'll see as we flash forward that there will be other major characters throughout the film trilogies that were introduced in animation as well.
So now we're going to move on to Droids. And so Droids came out in 1985 at the same time as Ewoks. And so this came out at the time when it was Saturday mornings, and it was 80s kids were desperate for new content because we had just had Jedi. We knew it was going to be the last of the movies, and we still had all these toys and all this excitement for Star Wars, but we didn't have any new, you know, programming coming out. So George Lucas sort of said, all right, well, I don't want you to use my main characters because I may do something with them later, but you can take the Ewoks and you can take the droids, and Nelvana, you can go ahead and make a cartoon or cartoons out of these two things as long as you don't use my main characters. So you can kind of do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, and as a side note to that, you know, Kenner Toys did want to continue the Star Wars toy line with some original movie-type toys. They pitched this idea that Grand Moff Tarkin had survived the Death Star explosion, and there was going to be some sort of there was going to be a sand speeder and something called Mongo Beefhead Tribesman, which was really strange. And George Lucas and company were kind of like, that's not really what we want to do right now. So they said, you know, you can support these cartoons instead. And so there was an attempt, if you remember living in the 80s like I do, there was, we missed Star Wars, and Kenner was trying to make it happen, but Lucasfilm went another way, and so we got these cartoons.
So in Droids, it's the adventures of R2 and C-3PO, as I'm sure you can figure out by the title, and they get passed between 3 different masters, Thal Jobin, Jan Tosh, and Mungo Beobob. And yeah, those are some crazy Star Wars names, and they're very, very, the whole tone of this show is just completely different from anything we had seen at that point. So it was kind of a real departure.
Yeah, the first story cycle is with Thal Jobin and his compatriots, and it deals with them trying to stop a crime syndicate from stealing a weapon called the Trigun 1. It's fallen into the hands of the Trigun 1. They've already stolen it, but they're trying to stop them from using it. I don't know how many people watched the original broadcast of Droids when it was out? Okay. Were you weirded out by the fact that the first hero you saw on screen had like half his head shaved and the rest of it was red? I mean, this doesn't really look like anything we've seen in a Star Wars movie before. I was really thrown, but that's the style they adopted for this first story cycle.
I think that was the style of hair a lot of us had.
Right.
True.
Not if you were 7.
But I wasn't.
Right,
I was
right.
in high school then.
Gotcha.
I thought the whole thing was weird though, minus that there's R2 and C-3PO.
Right.
The
Yeah.
whole thing was just bizarre.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, it's pretty different. And then the Jan Tosh plot shows them, there's this whole dethroned alien prince, and they're helping him sort of reclaim his throne. The animation is kind of cool, and I like the idea that they were trying to create new stories, kind of like extended universe type stuff, which is interesting that they went in that direction. But I mean, it definitely doesn't feel like anything that we'd seen previously. What's the
Right.
name of the planet that they're on in this particular?
Oh, Tynes Horky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Times Horky. What are you gonna do? The last master that they come across is actually Mungo Beobob, and it's kicked off by this movie called The Great Heap, and this is probably the high point, I would think, of this series. I don't know if you've seen Droids. I don't know if you've seen this, because it was the last part. But this guy, the bad guy, is kind of like Jabba the Hutt meets the Death Star trash compactor. He's kind of scary and creepy and weird, and Mungo Beobob is actually a pretty cool leader. So
Yeah,
he's
this
fun to
was
watch.
a primetime broadcast, like this ABC Sunday night special or whatever it was. They actually broadcast this apart from Saturday morning. They made this like a nighttime special, and it was feature length. And the Great Heap gets his power by, he has an R2D2 R2 unit socket in his mouth, and so he has what he calls a harem of R2 units that he collects, and then they have like a pool and like a spa and
Sounds pretty
everything,
creepy.
and then he selects one, and then they drag this R2D2 off, or R2 unit off. They put it in his mouth, and he drains it until it just turns the color of bone marrow, and then he ejects it, and then he, goes on his way for a few days until he needs another one. It's really messed up.
So to give you a flavor of what this show was like, we're gonna play a little clip.
Must be better than.
Why won't you go to immediately? Yes, sir.
Oh, there you are, finally.
I've been looking all over the place for you management people.
Do you have any idea what a dry environment like this can do to a servo joint?
No, of course not.
And a Fenn brake modulator? Any idea what ore dust will do to that?
No, of course you don't.
I squeak, I groan, and are there any auxiliary lubrication kits in the cargo hold?
No, of course not.
It really, there were times in Droids where it captured a great flavor. Like it captured some of that humor, it captured some of that Star Wars-ness that we all like. One of the problems, though, was that the network actually said when they were developing the series that they felt the show was too Star Wars-y. Which, it's like, so...
Yeah, one of the plots that was pitched to them, I don't know exactly what the plot entailed. It was called something like Star-Lord, oddly. But they were like, no, we got to reject this script. It's too Star Wars-y, so we got to keep it a little different. We want to make our own universe with this.
Right, yeah, and it's weird because, Star Wars had already made, the trilogy had made $1 billion even in the 80s, and yet this network is getting the opportunity to do a Star Wars cartoon, and they're like, we don't really like that Star Wars flavor you got going on there. It's like, wow.
Yeah, several of the movie characters and vehicles do make appearances in this show, including, as you can see, Boba Fett, IG-88, A-Wings, and the Skiff, which was kind of cool. It was very intentional in terms of toy sales and things like that.
Yeah, the A-Wing and the Skiff were from the last two lines, the Droids line and the Power of the Force line from Kenner. And they were slowing up in sales because we were all moving on to Transformers and G.I. Joe and things like that. And so they put them in this cartoon to try and keep them front of mind so kids might go out and buy them off the clearance racks.
The animation, as you saw, is very distinctive, and it was all hand-drawn. And they, even though Nelvana is a Canadian company, they actually outsourced a lot of that animation to Korea. And apparently it was about, on average, for an hour, which was half droids and half Ewoks, it cost somewhere for each hour about $500,000 to $600,000. So in the 80s, that was a huge amount of money. It was one of the most expensive shows that was done during the 80s. And George Lucas really did want it to be a groundbreaker, because that's what he's all about, is he wants to sort of push things forward and make things exceptional. In that vein, the song for the show, I don't know if you guys remember the song. I know some of you probably haven't heard it. It was actually performed by Stuart Copeland of the Police. And so I'll just give you a little example of what that sounds like.
Yeah, when they did the DVD release of a few episodes of Droids a few years ago, they cut this intro out so they wouldn't have to pay Stuart Copeland royalties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That almost seems like Scooby-Doo meets Star Wars a little bit.
Yeah. It's kind of the tone of the show, really.
Right.
Cartoons in the 80s were kept in check, not by legislation, because Reagan actually deregulated children's television, but the parents' groups actually stepped in. So you got widely different rulings and standards for every show. So you would have a show like Rambo, which, unlike even G.I. Joe would shoot guns on the show, but they made them laser guns. Rambo actually used real weapons, and they were shooting all the time. But somehow, the stormtroopers were made into these stick-carrying things instead of having blasters. So it's really weird that the stormtroopers in this show just don't have their blasters. They have these big sticks.
Yeah, and the other thing that they really couldn't get out of their head was the landscape. C-3PO and R2-D2 seem to have been pre-visualized as always wandering in a desert. So every single story cycle took place on a barren wasteland rock. I feel like that's just because that was the iconic image of 3PO and R2-D2 wandering in the sands of Tatooine.
And you get a lot of goofy things happening in this show. So you get an R2 unit with high heels and R2-D2 breakdancing in front of a jukebox. And unfortunately, C-3PO constantly ends up in these very compromising positions.
Right. And this is one for you. The fingers on the characters that are human constantly switches. So some of the characters have 4 fingers properly, some of them have 3. When I say fingers, I don't include thumbs. And then sometimes it actually switches on a character itself. In one scene, in one episode, Mungo has 4, and the next scene he's got 3. It's bizarre.
You could do a fun drinking game with that or something. Huh?
And this show also really seemed to be a testing ground for story elements that Lucas wanted to use in the prequels. So, for example, you have speeder races in the desert, you have giant wheel vehicles, you have wacky diner scenes, you have R2-D2 and a little boy flying a spaceship, you have a big sequence with R2 and 3PO in a droid factory. I mean, there's a lot of prequel predicting going on in this series.
And not even just the prequels, but The Force Awakens. Now, I don't know if this is just a coincidence, but this is Kylo Ren. This is Kylo Ren.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're related, but that's quite a coincidence, because Kylo Ren is just not the most common name. The show only lasted one season. It wasn't very successful. It's no longer considered canon, and it just remains out of print. So, like Ewoks, Lucasfilm has never produced these in the whole series. They've put out 1 or 2 VHS tapes, but.
Yeah, and Kenner, as we said, did do toys. They did a number of the characters from the first 2 story cycles. They never got around to doing the Mungo Baobab story cycle, so we never got a cool Great Heap action figure or anything like that. These are the prototypes of what would have been the second series with Mungo up on the top left, second from the left. But these never were made because Droids never lasted beyond 1 season.
And that's one of the most valuable Star Wars toys, the famous Blix, which was only
Yes.
available in Brazil, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Vlix actually has an adopted last name from collectors. He's officially known as Vlix on card, because if you have a Vlix that's still on the card, you have a small fortune in your
I
hands.
believe there's only 3.
Yeah, there's only a few documented examples. There's as many examples as there are fingers on the human characters in this show.
So now we're going to talk about Ewoks. Who loves Ewoks? No? No one?
Now,
No one?
in all fairness, Ewoks did get 2 seasons. Now, I'm not saying that was what I thought about going into it. I kept thinking, oh, Ewoks. But when I watched the first season, I was actually very impressed, and as an adult. And I enjoyed it more than the season of Droids that we sat through. But we'll get to that.
Yeah, Ewoks came out at the same time. That was sort of like a Star Wars hour of animation on Saturday mornings. And it lasted 2 seasons, like Michael said. And again, these characters were just sort of their own thing. They're very kind of different from what we saw in Return of the Jedi.
There was a whole movement back then, and that was part of where Ewoks ran into trouble, was that all the networks wanted shows like Gummy Bears, Flintstone Kids, Smurfs, Muppet Babies. They wanted that kind of feel. And the Ewoks, you'll see as we go along that the Ewoks had to change course in the second season to meet up with that, because the first season they look cute, but you'll see that the plots are a little different.
So who can tell me how Batman is related to Ewoks? All right, so Paul Dini, who was the writer, producer, and editor of Batman animated series, wrote about 40% of the Ewoks episodes. And you can actually tell when you watch the show, because it kind of has that dark Batman-y flavor. I know that you're thinking this girl's crazy, it's Ewoks, but just, we're going to show you a couple clips and you'll see what I mean. A lot of the show centers around Wicket W. Warwick and his friends on Endor, but they use a whole lot of Lord of the Rings type feel in there and storylines and things like that. So
yeah, there's magic involved. It's not the Force, it's magic.
Most of the plots are sort of centered around 2 things. One is this thing called soul trees. And a soul tree is a sacred tree that's planted when an Ewok is born. And if anything happens to destroy the tree, it removes the Ewok's will to live. So, the fact that the enemies are trying to set the soul trees on fire is super dark. It's really, really?
And half the people in this audience are like, how can I destroy the soul trees?
I know, right? The other big plot device is the Sun Star, and that is an artifact that is, it has immense power. We don't really know where the power comes from. We don't know where the rock came from. We don't really know why any of this is happening, but it's a great plot device to drive every single episode forward.
And the bad guys in this show are the Duloks, and the Duloks they evoke the Grinch. I mean, they look like the Grinch, but they are actually related to Ewoks, much in the same way that in Tolkien, the orcs and the elves are related. The Duloks are sort of the corrupted cousins of the Ewoks, and they live in the swamp, and they're jealous of everything the Ewoks have in what they call Bright Tree Village. They actually named the Ewok village. It's called Bright Tree Village. But the Ewoks themselves actually have a really great chemistry on this show in the first season when it's going well.
Well, let me just say this: the Duloks, were created by Joe Johnston in this book from 1984.
Oh yeah, Joe Johnston, the director of The Rocketeer and one of the original concept designers on the Star Wars trilogy. But the Ewoks have really great chemistry in the first season.
Nice day, For what? Spying on Peebo? I wasn't spying. You shouldn't spy on anyone, Latara. Unless, of course, they're doing something very interesting. Chihuahua. Oh. Goodbye, everyone. What's going on? What's so funny? We're casting spells. And here you are, cleaning house. Yes, we're back. I will show you the new tricks I've learned. We know how to be a rug thing.
There's this little quippy dialogue like that happens in some of the more well-written episodes that is fun to watch. I mean, it really is entertaining in bits. I'm not going to sit there and tell you that, oh yeah, the whole 21 minutes was just a riot. But there are moments, these glimmers of entertainment, and they genuinely make me laugh.
So the Ewok language, in Jedi, you'll remember, Ewoks speak Ewokese, and so you can't understand anything they're saying. But in this show, they kind of wanted to make it not be that way, because otherwise we wouldn't understand what the heck they're saying. So it's kind of this weird Spanglish thing where it's like half basic or English and half Ewokese. So there's some words that they throw around in the show, and we're going to show you that you can actually really easily speak Ewokese. Here's an example of one of the words that they use.
Willie, you lurdo.
So lurdo means idiot, or something akin to that. So we're going to go through a couple of things. So does anybody recognize this guy?
Gengar.
Ah, you're speaking Ewokese. Just yell the name of any bounty hunter as you attack someone, and it works perfectly. All right, so this next one is a little bit more complicated, but I think you're going to get it. Okay, just call out the name when you see the image.
E. Chihuahua.
The Chihuahua.
It's the exclamation of happiness, and that's awesome.
Yep.
Oh yeah, so we were talking about the darkness. We're going to show you a little clip that shows you what we're talking about. This show did get a little edgy at times. So what you just witnessed there is the evil witch Morag deciding that she's going to burn down the entire indoor forest.
The soul trees.
The soul trees to kill the Ewoks. And the way she's going to do that is by torturing the fireflies until they go insane. And then the fireflies are going to set fire to the whole planet. So it's like, oh, we've turned a corner here. Okay. She has leveled up.
So by season 2, Lucasfilm actually brought the animation closer in-house and took control, and they actually changed all the character designs. As you can see, 1 versus 2 on a lot of these characters, the new opening song. So I'm just going to play a really quick clip of them. This is the first season. All right.
Now, this is the second season.
All right, that's about as much bad as I can take.
Yeah, so one was very like Willie Nelson kind of, and the other one was very Care Bears. And they were changing the tone. What happened was Lucasfilm took the second season more in-house and said, we want to change everything up. We're going to change the design work. We're going to change the tone. We're going to change the screenwriting. Just take this clip, for example, with some of the zaniness.
Latara, I was just wondering. You go with me to the festival tonight? Me? Go to my first Shadow Night festival with you?
I mean, all of the little Care Bear stuff. It just became very Care Bear. It got away from the conflict with the Dulocs and the Evil Witch, and it became this, cutesy show.
It's generally more cartoonish.
Yes.
Yeah. So the very last episode of the show tries to tie in with Jedi, and so the one episode that does this, you actually see vestiges of the original trilogy. You have stormtroopers and
Star Destroyers.
and
You might remember the 2 live-action movies. The Ewoks phenomenon was huge, and so they had one live-action film that aired in 1984 before the cartoon aired. Then the cartoon launched, and then they had a follow-up to that, the Ewoks of Battle for Endor, during the run of the cartoon in 1985. Ewoks were not the pariah that they are today. They were actually this, massive children's franchise on their own.
So, I mean, there were a lot of great opportunities for toys, and like I said, Kenner was trying to push as many of these as possible. So we had the cool glider and the battle wagon.
The battle wagon, the Ewok battle wagon, which makes an appearance in the show. But these were also toys that were starting to slow in sales on toy aisles. So
oddly, these were marketed under the film brand. They were not marketed as part of the Ewoks line.
Right.
But they only appear in the Ewoks cartoon.
Right.
So.
And they really did try to make the characters from the movie translate over into the cartoon in most instances. For example, the little we knew about Logray from Return of the Jedi was from his figure card. He was a medicine man, and they turned him into the village shaman and wizard for the show. Some of them they changed, though. Like Tebow was an adult warrior in Return of the Jedi, but then they youthened him to make him Wicket's friend in the Ewoks cartoon. And this is the line of toys. They had the plushies, they had the figures. The top 6 figures on the left are the ones they actually released. The bottom 6 are ones that were supposed to be in a second series, but like Droids, they didn't make them.